Welcome back, guys. In this next series of videos, we'll be trying to do a program with SQLite as database in Android, and we'll be trying to do retrieval, insert, update, and delete operations using SQLite in Android. So before we go to the program part, I thought it's better to know about what is SQLite and a few important keywords which you will be requiring for this particular program. We'll just have a quick review of them and then we'll get into the program. I guess by now all of you know what is SQLite. You have used it in the last semester in Python. So I'm not going to stress upon this much, but you already know it's an open source SQL database that stores data into a text file on your phone or your device, whichever you're running it on. It supports all RDBMS functionalities, and we don't require something like JDBC, ODBC, like how we have done all other databases with all other technologies with SQLite. That is, it's pretty much straightforward and simple. And in Android, it is inbuilt. It is used to store structured or repeating data, which you already know. And it comes with Android comes with inbuilt SQLite functionality, which means we need not write or we need not import something which is external to use SQLite. And you need to use that package name android.database.sqlite, which is part of Android. Don't worry about it. And just like how I told in the last videos, devices internal storage. Please note the databases get stored inside the internal storage of your app. If you know where to find it, we'll be doing it in this program. But please note it will be in your app's private folder. Your data is secure because by default that place is not accessible for users except for root users. Now, particularly with this kind of a program, there'll be two objects involved. So I just want to talk about these two objects. Number one, which we already know, it's plain old Java object, POJO. It's not compulsory to use a POJO in your program when you have SQLite database, but I highly recommend it because it makes your code reusable, first thing. The second thing is it becomes very simple to understand if you use a POJO, and it defines all entities in your table. And the second one is a data access object. Some people do not prefer writing this, but I recommend these two because it makes your project structured, first of all. Second thing is the code is organized in a particular fashion, which means you will know where to go to find any issues in the project. So when it comes to data access object, it is nothing but a Java class which contains all the data operations like opening the database, closing the database, retrieving one record, inserting, updating, deleting. All these operations, if I write it inside one file and keep them separately, I can call that as a data access object because that class's object will help you to access data. I want you to remember a few keywords before we go to the program. The first keyword is SQLite Open Helper. That's a full class. Please note capital SQLOH. It contains a set of APIs which helps you maintain the database operations. I've just given the description of what it does. It makes sure that creating and updating the database is only done when it is required, not during every time app starts up. So when it comes to SQLite Open Helper, it plays a very key role in getting you the database which is stored in your private data folder. All you need to get is these two methods: get readable database and writable database. A readable database and writable, as the name goes, it's obvious to understand what it does, but please note writable database can perform select, insert, update, and delete. When it comes to readable database, the only query it can perform is select. So you choose which is required for the operation which we are about to do. That's it. The second keyword which I wanted to focus on is cursor. I've already spoken about this cursor in content provider program in the contacts app, if you remember. Cursor is like a result set in JDBC, what we had done in the last semester. So in JDBC, how result set would represent data which comes from the database, where you perform execute query and then get the data as a result set. Here you will use the query to get a cursor. And the cursor has API that allows an app to read columns that are returned from your query and also iterate over that rows of result set. If the result set is there, it doesn't mean that you can start retrieving data directly from the result set unless you use a specific method. If you remember, in result set we use the word rs.next. Here also the same concept is available. If you notice, I've put it in, I've highlighted that specific sentence. I want you to remember this. When a cursor is returned from a query method, its position points to the spot before the first row of data. Which means, imagine if there are 5 records, the position of the rows will be 0, 1, 2, 3, 4. But the cursor will be pointing at -1. This is the idea. So if you want the first record, which means the 0th row, you need to move the cursor to the next row. That's the idea. Same thing we did in the result set. We said while rs.next or if rs.next. We made the result set to move to the next record because by default it points to no valid row. I've just highlighted a few methods in the cursor class to make sure that you understand I've only highlighted the one which we are going to use, but I just wanted to see what are the other things which are available in the cursor's object. Move to first, move to last. Moves the cursor to the first row or the last row respectively. Move to next is somewhat similar to what I just told, rs.next. Similarly, we say move to next. And I'll be using only that, but then there is move to previous, there is move to a particular position, etc, etc. But I wanted to remember that all returns Boolean. It just says whether I can move to the next row or not. If it returns false, you have reached the last line or you have not even had any data in the cursor. The next keyword which I want you to focus on is the word called content values. Now, it is not compulsory for you to use content values again, but it is highly recommended because it makes your work much simpler. So content value is like name value pairs. It has the content of a particular entity. Now, for example, I've just put one code, content value object is created, and then value dot put. You need to pass two parameters. Number one, name. Number two, value. Name is the column's name. Value will be whatever the user passes, or you can put your own data. That is content values. Please note these keywords. I'll be using all these keywords in the program. So in this video, all I am going to do is create two objects, which I mentioned in the PPT as one is the POJO, the other one is the data access object. So in order to create that, you need to understand what will be the table structure of our demo database. So I'm going to use something called student database, and in that one the table name is going to be TBL student details, and I'm going to keep 4 columns. One is register number, name, course, email address. That's all I'm going to keep, and you can see the data type will be integer for register number. Remaining everything is text, and extra constraints what I've applied is the register number is the primary key, which means 2 register numbers cannot be the same. It should be unique. I've not given auto increment. If you want, you can give, but since I'm using register number, I'm not giving auto increment. Remaining all constraint is simple. No null values are allowed. That's it. This is my table structure. With this structure, let's create a POJO, and let's also create a data access object now. I have created a new empty activity project called SQLite demo. I am not going to put anything in the activity before I finish POJO and data access object. So first let's start with the POJO. Let me go to the project. Let's right click on the package name of the same place where main activity is located and say new Java class. And since my entity which I am going to create a POJO of is student, let me just name it as student. So the class name is student. Let's click on OK. You'll get a simple class with the name as student. That's it. Now the only thing I'm going to write inside this class is the column names which I want with their corresponding data types in Java. So the first one, if you remember, I need register number, name, course and email. The first one would be private int, let me just name it as register number. The second one is private string student name. Let's do the same thing. Private string student course. Private string student email. I have created 4 variables, and all these 4 variables are going to represent a column in my table. So this is the only code which I'll be typing. Remaining everything I'll be generating. First thing I require is to create a constructor. 2 constructors I'll be creating. One will be an empty constructor. The other one would be a constructor which initializes all these 4 values. Let's do that now. Just right click on that place and then say generate. And let's choose constructor. Without choosing anything, just click on the students and then click on OK. You'll get an empty constructor. So first step is done. Second one is to create one more constructor. Let's choose all the 4 values which you created here right now and click on OK. So that would be a constructor which takes all the 4 values as parameters. Now that is done. Now the last part would be to create getters and setters for that. So let's create generate getter and setter, choose all the 4 and click on OK. Your work here is done and you have got a proper POJO ready. Now if you create a new object of this particular class, which means in other words an instance of this class, which basically represents one row in your table. I'm going to repeat it again. Please understand this. This is very important for you to remember. An instance of this class would be equal to one row in a table. This is a rule which you need to remember. Now that we have the Pojo, let's start the data access object. Same way how you created a Java file here, let's create one more. Go to the project, go to the place where you just created the student class. Let's right click on the same package name and say new Java class. And this time I'm going to create a data access object. So I'm going to name it as student DAO, data access object. Just click on OK and you have the class ready. In the data access object class which we just created, we are going to create a few final, in other words, constant values which will be used and reused again and again in my project. So for that purpose, I'm going to say PSFS. It will create a public static final string. So I'm going to create a public static final string. Let me name it as DB name. I'll put in full caps just to indicate that it is a constant value, is equal to. My database name is student DB. The next one, PSFS, TBL name is equal to what table name you would like to give. I'll just give TBL student details. Please note, anymore wherever I would refer table name, I'll just call TBL name. I'll not use this word. Wherever I say database, I'll just call DB name. That's enough. Now the next thing is column names. Individual 4 column names I'm going to create. PSFS. First one is ST underscore register number is equal to. Please note this. Normally you can use whatever name you want, but since I am going to use a cursor adapter in my project, I am going to name it as underscore ID. Please note, irrespective of what database you are creating, if you keep the primary key as underscore ID, it will work very well with cursors. That's why I'm using that. It doesn't make a big difference for us because the column name is anyway, we'll be calling it as ST underscore register number. So just put this as underscore ID. Second one is the name. So I'm going to say ST underscore name is equal to, I'm going to type it as student underscore name. The next one, PSFS. ST underscore course is equal to, I'm going to say student underscore course. Last one, PSFS, ST underscore email is equal to student underscore email. Now all our constant values are ready. Let me create one more string which will have the create table query. Let's start with that. PSFS. I'll just name it as create underscore query. Now let's begin with creating a SQL query. So if you wanted this table to be created, how would I create the table? First, let's see what the query would look like. Create table, table name, the first column name, data type, comma, column name, data type, and it goes on like this. So how do I write it in Java? Please note, it will not verify whether the query is right or wrong because you're writing everything inside double quote. So according to Java, it is a string. But when you call it as a query, Java has a way of finding whether that query is right or wrong. But anyway, I'll show you that shortly. Let's start with the code now. You know the query. I'm going to write it in different lines so that the full line will not go. I'll be writing it line by line. You can also write the same way. I'm going to say create table. I need a space and I need the table name, which I already have. I'll just call that. And then let's open the bracket. Let's concatenate that, and I'll not continue in the same line because it'll be scrolling, so I'll be writing it in the different lines. So the next line, I'm going to give the column name. The first column name is ST underscore register number, and let's concatenate that and say what data type it is. It is integer, and I have a constraint applied which is primary key, comma. This much is SQL. The next word which I am looking for is the column name. The next column name is ST name. So I'm just going to put a plus and come to the next line. ST underscore name plus. Again, this is a text which is not null. That's the constraint which I'm applying, comma. And then let's continue. ST underscore course plus text not null. I'll put another plus and let's start. ST underscore email plus text not null. With that, our query is closed. Please note, when you write this query, very important thing is if you make any mistake in this, the way in which you write, the entire program might be messed up. So it's better always to check whether your query is right or wrong by printing that statement out before you even call it on a database. The next two things which we require here in this program, number one is context. Number two is the database itself, SQLite database itself. Now, if you see why I require a context here. If you remember, I created this as a standalone Java file. I've not even called it anywhere, and this Java file cannot run on its own. It needs to run in the context of something, and the only thing which we can run is an activity. So whatever activity calls this file must be aware of which activity called it. So for that purpose, I'm going to create a private object of context, which needs to be only passed by the class which wants to call this DAO. So I'm just going to name it as context. Also, I don't want the context to change when one activity is talking to it. So let me just make it as final, and then it will throw an error. To fix this, by applying this or passing this context object through the constructor. So I'll just say add constructor. It would create a program, a code, small block of code, something like this. Now, before you continue with this constructor part, let's also do one more thing, that I'm going to create an object of SQLite database. Let me name it as database. This would be an object. I'll not instantiate it here because I cannot open a database directly. I need to use the help of a keyword which I mentioned in the PPT called SQLite Open Helper. So let's create an SQLite Open Helper based class. So let me come outside this constructor. Please note, I'm still inside the class of student DAO. Inside this class, I'm going to create another inner class called DB helper, which will extend from SQLite Open Helper. Please note, I'm just creating my own class called DB helper, which extends from SQLite Open Helper, which I mentioned in the PPT. Now, how do I fix this? Let's fix these errors by implementing its methods. And still there is an error because it was looking for a constructor. Let me click on create a constructor. Choose the first one, which has 4 parameters: context, string, cursor factory, and int. That's all. Now that the helper is available, let's call that helper in our main class. I know I've not written anything. I'll write it shortly. Let's call this helper class. So I'm going to create an object of DB helper. Let me name it as helper. I'll instantiate it as soon as you call this object. So I'm going to say helper is equal to new DB helper. I need to pass a few parameters. The first one is context. By now you would have it. Second thing, what is the name of the database, which I already have? I'll just call DB name. Done. Do you have a cursor factory here in this program right now? No. Let me just say null. And what is the version of the database which you are using? Please note, you need to keep incrementing this if you change the schema of your database. For example, if the structure of the database is changed and you're adding one more, let's say, date of birth to that column list, you need to make this as version 2 when you upgrade it, which means the previous one should be dropped and the new one should be upgraded. So right now I'm just going to keep version as 1 because it's the first time I'm running it. I'm now going to give another version, so let me just leave it as it is. Now inside the helper class, you see that the constructor is proper. 2 more methods are available, which is onCreate and onUpgrade. The code is very simple. OnCreate, what would you like to do? When the helper starts, I want to see whether the table already exists or not. If it exists, I don't want to do anything. I just want to open it. If it does not exist, I would like you to create it. So let's change a little bit in that query which we have written. Create table if not exists. This is simpler in that case. You're just saying create table if it does not exist. What if it exists? Don't create table, just come out. In the onCreate of this DB helper, all you need to do is to make sure that you call the database object which is passed to this onCreate and then say execute SQL to create that table. So let's do that. I'm going to call DB which is passed to me here. Please note whatever object name comes here, call that and then say execute SQL. And what SQL should I execute here? It is the create query which you already have created already. So I'll just call that method here. That's it. Now once you have called it, now your system understands that whatever you have written inside create query is an SQL statement. Now if you see the code will be a little bit different here. The colors have changed here. Now, if you make a mistake in the SQL query, it understands that it is a mistake, because you see, for example, I'm going to put these two things together. Even though it is the inside double quote, it will throw an error saying that it is expected a different syntax, but it got a different syntax. So the way to fix that would be to give this key so that you can see that the syntax is proper. Now, since there is no other error in the query, I assume that the query is okay, and then we'll proceed. Since this is a database operation, normally please don't keep it directly. Let's put it inside a try catch so that it does not crash if it is having an exception. Let's put try catch, and this part is done. Now, the upgrade part also must be taken care of. On upgrade, what do you mean by an upgrade here? When I say an upgrade, not the version of SQLite which is installed on your phone, rather the schema version which you have in your database. So when I say schema, I mean the table structure here. So imagine if you have changed the table structure and added 2 more records to it. You cannot continue using the previous database which you had created. You need to drop it and recreate this new one again. So what I need to do here is, please note, when upgrade is passed, you will get the old version and the new version. So if the old version is 1 and the new version is 2, you will be changing the database. So what will I write? I'll just call db.execute.sql. I'll write a simple block of code, drop table if exists. Please note the query should be in green color since I've put it inside double quote, but since the system expects a string there as SQL, it has changed the color to understand that it is an SQL. Exists, I'll concatenate that with the table name which you have. Now, what happens here is that the current table with that particular table name, if it exists, it will be deleted or dropped. And immediately after that, you need to also call onCreate with the database which you have got now. So which means drop whatever already exists and create the new database once again. This part is the open helper part. Now that the helper is ready, let's start with the remaining methods. I'm going to write 5 methods. One to retrieve all, second one to retrieve one, third one to insert, fourth one to update, fifth one to delete. So let's do all these 4 or 5 operations. But before that, there'll be 2 important operations called as open and close. So let's do that. First, I'm going to create a public. Please note, I'm going to pass an object of this class itself. So I'm going to say student DAO as the return type, and then say open connection, or just write the word open, doesn't matter. Inside the open connection, all I'm going to do is the database object which I created here, I'm going to instantiate it. So I'm going to say database is equal to call the helper and then say get. What type of database? Readable or writable? Please note, if I call readable, I can only perform select all or select one, all those things, but I'll not be able to do insert, update or delete. But if I get a writable database, I can do both. So I'm just going to call a writable database, and then I'm going to say return an object of this class. And if you call this open connection method, an object of student DAO will be returned with the helper being open. So the opposite would be very simple: public void close connection. Inside that, I'm going to write only one line of code, call the helper and then say close the helper. If the helper is the bridge between us and the database, if I close the bridge, connection is cut. That's it. So let's go to the remaining methods. The first method is to retrieve all records from the database. For that, what should I do? I'm going to say public. Please note the return type is going to be cursor, which I've already explained in the PPT. I'm going to say retrieve student details. Since I'm retrieving all the records, I'm not going to pass anything, but if I want one record, I need to tell which register number do you want to pull up. Inside this method, what we are going to do here is we are going to retrieve all the records, which means select star from table name. There are 2 ways in which I'm going to write. I'm going to write both. I'll comment one out. One is to use the traditional way of passing a query and then returning a cursor. Second one is not to use the query, but rather using an inbuilt method for that particular purpose. So first thing I'm going to write is the inbuilt method, which I recommend you to use, because you don't write SQL directly, you only write methods. So I'm just going to say return, call that database object which we just instantiated, and then say query. Please note, this query method returns cursor object. So I'm going to just call query. And I need to pass a lot of parameters. That's the only annoying thing here. I'll write it all, but let's see that. First one is the table name. So I'm just going to pass table name. This is the first parameter. Second one, what are the columns you require? Please note, select star from a table name is not a recommended way. You would have studied that, but this does not have star and SQL notations. It is perfectly Java notation. So I'm just going to say new string array. It's expecting a string array, and in that one you need to pass all the column names which you want to retrieve. You already know the column names. I just need to call st underscore res number, st underscore name, st underscore course, and then st underscore email. These are the columns which you require. And you see that again there are so few parameters which are expected to be passed, starting with, do you want to select anything specifically, and if you want, is there any arguments for that selection? Do you have group by? Do you have having? Do you have order by? None of this I have. So for the remaining 5, I'm going to just put null. So I put 5 nulls after that 2 parameters. With that, our work is done. This is using inbuilt method of the SQLite database. Now, what if I wanted to write simple select star from, or I want to manipulate my own way of writing code? In that case, you need to write database.raw query. Please note, raw query also returns cursor, but here you have to write the SQL. The select star from table name, you'll have to write it here. This is manipulated by the system. So let's write raw query. I'll just say select star from, the table name. I'll just concatenate that with the table name. And second one, do you have any selection arguments? No. Done. Both queries what I've written here are exactly the same, but only difference is this is a raw query and this is a processed query. So normally we would recommend this because this will be like a prepared statement what you have in JDBC. This is vulnerable to SQL injection attacks. So anyway, I'll comment this out. I'll just keep this, but you'll see both the code is available here. This is if no parameters, no selection arguments are passed. But let's do one more thing with selecting only one student record. I'm going to say public cursor get student detail and detail of a particular person. So I'm just going to pass something called register number. If you pass the register number, I'll get only that particular student's detail. Now let's see how to do it in normal query as well as in raw query. So first let me write raw query. It's easier to understand. Return database.raw query. I'm going to say select star from same thing TBL name, but there's a small difference that you have a where clause where the first column name is st underscore register number. I'll concatenate that with equal to and put a question mark. That's my query. And do you have any argument? Do you have any selection argument? The next question it asks is, do you have any selection argument? Yes, I have. I need to replace that question mark with something. This register number, let's do that. I'll just create a string array because it expects a string array there. And I need to pass register number. Since a number cannot be passed as a string array, I'll just concatenate that with a simple double quotes, open double quotes, which makes it understand that it is a string, but it's not basically a string. It's just a value which is passed. Done. This is one way of writing a raw query. Now let's write it with the actual way. I'm going to say return database.query, which is part of your table. So I'm just going to pass the first thing is table name. Second one, do you have a column list? I have already. I'll just take the same. I want all the records, so I'll just paste it here. And the second one, the third one is, do you have a selection? Yes, I have. So I need not write the where and all, but just the condition. The condition is very simple, that st underscore register number, concatenate that with an equal to question mark. That's all. And that question mark will be replaced with the selection argument, which I've already written on top. So you can even take that from the top, pass it there. And then, is there group by? No. I'll just put null. Next one, is there having? No. And then order by? No. Done. These two are exactly the same query. With this, retrieve all, retrieve one is done. Now let's go to the insert, update and delete part. Now, please understand that insert inside a table or update inside a table requires, you can even use raw query like insert. That becomes very complicated. There is a simpler way. I'll only use a simpler way right now. I'm going to create a simple Boolean way of getting whether it's inserted or not. I don't want to know anything else. I just want to pass some data there. And if you get the data and insert it, I want true. If it is not possible to insert, false. That's it. So I'm going to say insert student detail. And what are the things I need to pass to insert? If you remember, I have ID, which means register number, name, course, email. I need to pass all these four to the insert in order for that insert to work. But please note, I created a Pojo for this specific purpose alone because I don't want to write that much data here. All I need to do is all these four data what you require is stored inside that object of student. So I'll just call an object of student and then pass it. That's enough. Now that S would have all the details of the student like register number, name, email, course, everything. So now how do I create a content value? So I'm going to create an object of content values. Let me just put it as CV is equal to new content values. I need to put data inside the content value as name value pair or key value pair. The key would be the column name, value will be whatever is there in the student's object. So I'm going to say CV dot put. I need the column name. Column name first one is st underscore register number. Come on, where is the value coming from? Call that object of student and then say get register number. Done. Like that, we can do the remaining CV dot put st underscore name, comma s dot get student name. Next, CV dot put st underscore course s dot get student course. CV dot put st underscore email s dot get student email. Done. Now all I need to do is return, just write, call the database which is instantiated and then say dot insert. Please note insert returns a long value. Understand that the long means once you pass an insert query, a primary key will be inserted and it will return the value of the primary key. If it returns a positive number, insert has worked successfully. If it cannot insert, it will return -1. So please note, I am expecting a Boolean value, but the return type is long. Let's fix that. I'll say insert. What is the table name? Table name is, I got it there. And the second one, do you have a null column hack? Which means if any of those values are null, would you like to insert the value or not? In my case, all are not null. So I'm just going to say don't have any null column hack. Last one, content values. I have already created a pair of content values. I'm going to open that. Now, if I stop here, it will return a long value, which means, for example, if I put the register number as 171717 and that is inserted, the return which I get from here would be 171717. But the problem here is I'm looking for a Boolean value. Let's keep it simple. If it is greater than 0, which means you have inserted successfully. If it is less than 0, which means -1 or anything else, it is an error. So all I'm going to say is if it is greater than 0. Done. Now, if I call student detail with any of the student object, I'll get true or false. True means inserted successfully. False means not inserted. Some exception has happened. That's all. Like this, let's do the update also quickly. I'll say public Boolean update student detail. So in that one also, I need to only pass the object of student. Because in order to update, you need all the 4 records. Even though you are not expected to update the primary key here, we always expect you to pass all the 4 values, the 3 values which you want to update and the key. So I need all the 4. All the 4 are stored anyway in the student object. That's it. I'm going to copy paste the same lines from the top to bottom because both are exactly the same. The last line I'll write return database dot update. I need to pass the first parameter is table name. So I'll just pass the table name. Second one is content value, which I already have. And the third one, where clause, very important. Update without a where clause is a big blunder. So I'm going to say, what is the where clause here? Where clause is, we have already put that here. in the select star from table name where, I'm just going to copy this next two lines which is there till here. I'll copy that, I'll paste it here. Done. Now I don't have register number passed to me, but it is there inside this S. I'm just going to call S dot get register number. Now the error comes because you are supposed to pass boolean, but what I'm getting here is an int. Please note, while inserting it returned long, while updating it is tailing int. The reason is, while you go on update, how many rows got affected by that query will be returned. If it is 0, which means it is not updated anything. If it is greater than 0, which means it is updated something. So I'm just going to say greater than 0. Done. Which means if any rows gets updated because of that query, return true, otherwise return false. That's it. Now the last part of this program would be to create a method to delete a particular record. So I'm going to call public, again boolean, delete student detail. And for this, you need not pass the entire student table, student object here. The reason is, in order to delete, I require the primary key. Which record do you want to delete? Just like to get a student detail. So for that, I'm just going to pass int register number because that is the primary key of my table. Inside this, the query is very simple. I'm going to say return database dot delete. Here again, it's saying what is the table name, what is the where clause, where are the where arguments. So I'm just going to pass TBL name, comma. You have the remaining two things already with you. I'll just paste that. And again, it is showing an error. Reason is because it's looking for how many tables, it will return how many rows are deleted because of this query, but you are saying you want boolean. If it is greater than 0, which means it's deleted at least one record. Otherwise, it is not deleted anything. With this, our student DAO is ready. In the next part of the program, we will try to use this in our project.